Okay, we're back. Uh, I'm in my office today. I just wasted about 20 minutes. I lost my video contact, and what I want to do then is try to keep this as short as possible. And I want to get to the gist of a couple of theories, and I want to make comments on those theories. I was going to take you through the whole chapter, and it just seems like the more I stay on uh, online on any one video, I never know when it's just going to cut off, and that's what just happened. So really, I want to get to the gist of the chapter on deviance. So I'll trust you to read the chapter, get a good understanding of those four areas of sanctions: the positive, the negative, informal, and formal sanctions, and touch base with those and get a good feel for those, mainly because they're easy to get confused. So read that area, and then also look at some examples of each of those. Um, and then, of course, looking at the definition of deviance. Deviance is, in sociology, goes well beyond just simple criminal deviance. It's anytime we break the norm of groups that we belong to. Anytime a group's norms are broken, that's called deviant behavior. So from that definition, all of us are deviant. Sometimes on a daily basis, we do things that just being late for class is seen as deviant and from classroom norms. You have to have norms in place in order to be able to perceive deviance, because if you don't have any norms about what's right and wrong behavior, then it's very hard to recognize when someone's being deviant. That's why we feel uncomfortable sometimes when we travel to other cultures, other countries, is because we don't really know the ways and mores of the group. I'm going to go ahead and look at the three theories that try to pin down the source of deviance in society. So the first one I'm looking at is on page 186, and it's the structural strain theory that comes out of functionalist theory. And this theory was first given to sociology by Robert K. Merton, a very well-known structural functionalist. But structural strain theory, basically the logic is that all of us in society, we all adhere to the goals of the society. So, for example, all of us want a good, rich material life, since that's one of our goals in our society. One of our major goals is that people want a good material lifestyle. They have the good life, a nice job, 2 cars, a nice home, a nice vacation every year. You can name it, the good life. And so everybody wants this, but not everybody does not perceive their ability to get that good life through legitimate means. For individuals or for groups, some groups may have actual structural, what we call a collapse of structural opportunities, so that they're blocked from realizing the goals of the society that we all share, the valued goals of society. So it says in this hypothesis is that the more that people perceive that they're not able to legitimately reach or to get to the goals of the value goals of society, then the higher the probability that they will deviate. It may be based on perception. Some groups, nobody's ever been to college in the family or even in the community. Going to college almost seems like going to Mars for youngsters, and so it's almost as seen as an impossibility to some extent. So there's a higher probability, not 100% for sure, but there's a higher probability they may take a deviant route to success in order to achieve the legitimate goals of society, wanting the same kind of things in terms of nice clothes and a car and whatnot, but they're just taking an illegal route to gain those. And those the goals defined as valuable and legitimate for society tend to have unclear limits. So there's really no limits to material success in our society. 1 million You may be a millionaire, but you want to have 2 million or you want 10 million, right? No clear ceiling on what we can have. And then secondly, people are unsure whether the legitimate means that the society provides will allow them to achieve the goals. And thirdly, legitimate opportunities for reaching the goals remain closed to a significant portion of the population. So there's different strategies by which people will try to handle this situation. One strategy is to type of person we would call as a conformist or conformity is one strategy. This is the acceptance of the cultural goals such as a rich material lifestyle and the pursuit of those goals through legitimate means. We call that conforming your behavior to society's expectations. Then there's also what we call innovators or innovation. The acceptance of the cultural goals, but the rejection of the legitimate means to achieve them. They accept the cultural goals, but they reject the legitimate means. They found a faster route. So perhaps they live in a neighborhood where they can get involved in a street gang selling drugs, for example. That's a quicker route to the legitimate goals than saying having to put going through 5, 6, 7, 8 years of college and getting in debt, for example. Of course, it's sort of based on, in some sense, on a combination of race and social class. That the more wealth one has in our society, the closer they are to the legitimate goals of society in terms of their perception of their ability to realize. Because if you got enough money, you don't worry about having to go to college. If your family's got money, you may be able to get into a better college, live in a better neighborhood. Maybe your parents have been to college, so you've got that cultural capital, we call it, that helps to back you in terms of finishing college. So really, it's looking at in some sense as structural functionalism, but it has some of this conflict notion of inequality, and that some groups don't have the equal access to the legitimate, or perceive that they don't have equal access. It can also be the cause that they have legitimate route to the means to the valued cultural goals, so they may take an illegal route, a deviant route. So there's the deviance. Ritualism is another strategy, the rejection of cultural goals, but a rapid adherence to the legitimate means of achieving them. A rigid adherence to the legitimate means of achieving them. They reject the cultural goals, but a rigid adherence to the legitimate means of achieving them. So, sort of the stereotype here is of the person who, very intelligent. They really thrive in college, university, but they really haven't really set any higher goals for themselves. Some folks may say they're underachievers, is the term that's used. They have all the means and smarts and money and to realize the valued cultural goals of society, but they reject. To do so, but they reject the cultural goals, and they just I'll just stay and do I'll take the minimum achievement. So we call that an underachiever, is a term we use. They have a lot of potential, but they don't utilize it. There's another. It's called a retreatist. This is rejection of both cultural goals and the means of achieving them. Rejecting both the cultural goals, don't really care for a rich material life, and the means of achieving them. Legitimate route. So this would be sort of a good example of retreatists would be like the hippies of the 1960s who decided that they were going to, they no longer believed in the material way of life and as a goal in life, and they rejected the means of achieving it and just basically dropped out of society. Treatists can also be seen as like you're homeless and people living on the street. They just retreat from society for whatever reasons: alcoholism, drug use. The next strategy is rebellion, the full or partial rejection of both cultural goals and the means of achieving them, and the introduction of a new set of goals and means. So this could be like your revolutionary group that They have a full or partial rejection of the cultural goals and the means of achieving them. But they're not retreatists. They don't want to just drop out of society. They want to reform it. So they want to introduce a new set of goals and means. So like a revolution going from a capitalist society based on material success, private material success, and the profit over to a socialist style of economic society that's based on sharing economy. And so that would fit that bill, is to reform society, change the actual means of achieving the goals of society. So for us, one of my main point about the structural strength theory is that, again, we're looking at where do they pinpoint the cause of deviance in society. And so for the structural strength theorist, the causal factor is found in the structures of society itself. It's the structure of opportunities in society and the legitimate means of arriving at the goals of society, value, cultural goals, and that when people are blocked from being able to achieve those, to achieve a legitimate route, then they're more likely, not 100%, but they have a likelihood of taking an illegitimate route to the cultural goals, if you will. So the culprit then is in the structure of society itself. In the next theory, there's three that we're looking at. We have what's called differential association theory. Differential socialization theory, I'm going to read from the book and then give you my definition. A theory of socialization that explains how deviant behavior, especially delinquent behavior, is learned behavior. It says that when persons become criminal, they do so because of contacts with criminal patterns and also because of isolation from anti-criminal patterns. So basically what this theory is saying is that, again, remember that the theory is a socialization theory, that deviance is learned, and it's basically, just commonsensically, it's who we hang out with was the determinant of whether we become deviant or not. So the culprit for the differential association theories, the culprit is in the deviant subcultures that individuals belong to. It's not located in the individual. So the deviant behavior, the cause of it does not originate in the individual, because the individual from this theory is normally socialized. It's just that the culture that they're learning is a deviant subculture, set of goals and values and skills, if you will. And so for the structural strain, the culprit is the structures of society, is the cause of deviant behavior. For a differential association theorist, the culprit is in deviant subculture. It's in the culture itself. The individual then, from this standpoint, is normally socialized. They're not abnormally socialized. They're normally socialized into a specific set of cultural values and norms and beliefs and cultural skills, such as a shoplifting ring, for example. It tends to be highly skilled, coordinated behavior in order for a shoplifting ring to be successful in what they do. So the last one that we're looking at, of course, these are not the only ones, but these are the three major theories in deviance. Is called labeling theory. And labeling theory, which is Howard Becker was one of the early well-known symbolic interactionists again. And so labeling theory was the culprit in this situation is not the structures of society. The culprit is not really the culture. The culprit is in society's labeling certain behaviors as deviant or not, and having the power to do so. So this also incorporates a bit of, while it's based in symbolic interactionism, it also has a flavoring of conflict theory. It says that some groups in our society have more power than others to label certain behaviors as deviant, and other behaviors, let's say like corporate crime, for example, that may be more harmful to people than street crimes, may go unpunished because it's not so much defined as deviant, or may not be labeled as such when certain things happen. And labeling theory, a good in your readings of this time with the Saints and Roughnecks is just a great example of the study of using labeling theory as an analytical tool. You're looking at the difference between the behaviors, similar behaviors, right, between the Saints and the Roughnecks, and how one group, the Saints, they tend not to be labeled as deviant. They're just good kids sowing seeds, whereas the working class across the track, the Roughneck group in the community, they tend to get labeled harshly by the community and the police because they're seen as bad seed, right? They're seen as troublemakers, and so they get labeled much more harshly. And the author, what he's trying to show here, he's coupling this with conflict theory. He's looking at social class background. You could also do the same study by looking at race, for example. But in that study, it was two white gangs of high school kids. One was from the better off side of town, the other from the lower working class side of town. And so it's a good study in showing how labeling affects the outcomes for their lives. For the most part, the Saints went on to college, became successful. Many of the young kids from the boys from the Roughnecks ended up in trouble. A few of them ended up in prison, and but not every one of them. Again, it's not a 100% outcome. A young kid could be raised in a ghetto among all kinds of gangs and for whatever connections, or for whatever other variables they intervene. They may never join a gang. They may have had some people in their environment in school that motivated them, and they get out okay. Many kids get out. They escape that situation and become successful in life. But there's a high probability, though. There's a high probability that they will join a gang, and they may end up in trouble, taking the illegitimate route, as the structural string theorists talk about. But at the bottom of page 178, under labeling theory, again, you have certain types of categories of deviance under the labeling perspective. Conformists are people who do not violate the rules of a group and are treated accordingly. They just conform to what's expected. Pure deviance is people who have broken the rules of a group and are caught, punished, and labeled as outsiders. That is, they're labeled as a special person, and they're labeled as deviant. A secret deviant. What's a secret deviant? These are people who have broken the rules of a group, but whose violation goes unnoticed, or if not noticed, or if it is noticed, prompts no one to enforce the law. Secret deviant. So a person may do, and that for this theory, for labeling theory, a person could do something that may socially be considered deviant by the group, but if they didn't get caught and labeled as such, then only they know they did something, right? That's called secret deviance. Or let's say they do get caught, and for whatever reason, maybe out of loyalty to other group members, maybe it's overlooked altogether. We see this all the time in society where people do something that's deviant, but they don't get turned in, or if they do, they get just slapped on the wrist. Again, that sort of informal sanction: don't do this anymore, or we'll have to do something, label you the next time, right? There's also a self-fulfilling prophecy attached to the labeling perspective in terms of once a person is labeled as deviant, then they go through, and this our textbook doesn't really talk about it, but under labeling theory, we could talk about primary deviance, secondary deviance. Generally, the primary deviance is an act that somebody carries out, and they get caught and they get labeled as deviant. And then let's say they go to prison and they get caught up in a gang situation there, or a certain type of deviant subculture. Secondary deviance is when we talk about secondary deviance and distinguish it from primary deviance. The cause of secondary deviance is the label. So they're saying that once a person gets caught, gets labeled the first time, primary deviance, and then it's the self-fulfilling prophecy. They get labeled, they internalize the label. So for whatever reason, society brings up its structural blockage, like not employing an ex-convict, for example, and can't find a job. Secondary deviance, going into a deviant act again, second time, is based on the label. That's so you can think of in these terms between primary deviance and secondary deviance. There's also another category of deviance in labeling theory called the falsely accused. These are people who have not broken the rules of a group but are treated as if they have. So what labeling theory is saying to us here is the deviance is not based on the person's actions, because we have the phenomenon of the falsely accused in our society. Or among groups, is that a person gets falsely accused of doing something, and they can equally be labeled and then put through the whole 9 yards, and even though they didn't do anything wrong. Look at all the cases in prisons where people have been released from many years of being in prison, maybe on death row even, and then they find out that they were innocent after all. So all during that time they were the falsely accused. Of course, we did see this on the everyday level too. In peer groups, a member gets falsely accused of running around with somebody's girlfriend or boyfriend, and even though they didn't do it, they get banished from their group, or so the falsely accused is also this. It's important, the concept, because it tells us that for labeling theorists, the person doesn't have to actually commit the act to be defined, their behavior to be defined, and for them to be labeled as a deviant. So where does deviance come from? It comes from the society's ability to label certain behaviors as deviant and others as not. So this also has, as I said, a conflict power perspective in it, in that certain groups in our society, the lawmakers, politicians, certain medical institutes like the psychiatric association, certain medical organizations have the power to define certain behaviors as deviant and to label people such as psychotic or manic depressive. All of those psychiatric diagnoses are actual labels as well, and after a person's been labeled as such, it can affect their life in many ways in a negative fashion. It can lead to also the self-fulfilling prophecy. Once labeled as being mentally ill, a person may internalize that label and continue to think of themselves as mentally ill, even though they're beyond that and they maybe are better. Or it may work to keep them mentally ill, if you will. Then it goes on in chapters to talk about white-collar crime and corporate crime. So I think you guys can study that area and get a sense of white-collar crime and corporate crime. I'll leave that to your reading abilities. Let's see where else I want to go here. So the main thing for me for this presentation was on the 3 theories of deviance in sociology, and get you a good sense of their logics, if you will. One place you can go to now after you study and listen to the lecturette is on page 192. There's Theories of Deviance Summary. That'll help you to keep these straight. Again, all of these are important theories. This is an area where sociological theory gets involved with social policy, governmental policy. Structural strain theory locates deviance in the inequality in the structures of society. So many governmental policy, many programs are put in place to give people better opportunities, student loans and grants, and all that's based on the structural strain theory, that in order to help people, to keep them from taking the illegal route, is to give help to people to get legitimate means. Difference association finds a culprit in the deviant subculture. You have many programs out there, like, for example, the halfway home for a juvenile delinquent, where they're placed in what's basically a setup of a middle class home lifestyle, where they're placed on a token system, and good behaviors are awarded, bad behaviors are not, or get punished. And what they're trying to do is to take the policy notion is to take the young person out of the deviant subculture. Okay, take them out of those associations and place them in associations with middle class, quote unquote, normal people, and it's an attempt to re-socialize and to gain middle class legitimate norms and values and beliefs, and to get them to move away from their deviant subcultural values, norms, and beliefs and skills. It's kind of problematic because those deviant subcultures tend to exist in the institutions themselves. They continue on, and then many times kids simply return back to their neighborhoods once they get out and get right back into being caught up. But it's very much based on the labeling theories that, is based on the differential association. Take the kid out of the deviant subculture and place them in a quote unquote normal culture, legitimate culture, cultural surrounding, and to re-socialize. It's a socialization theory. And then lastly, the labeling perspective policy from this standpoint would be simply to get rid of certain categories of deviance, to decriminalize. For example, this notion of legalizing marijuana, for example. This would probably satisfy many labeling theorists that this is one way that we can reduce criminal behavior, or to reduce jail sentences and all for young people for smoking pot, if we just simply legitimize the substance and let the government control it. And then in that way we can get rid of a whole category of what we would call deviant criminal behavior, and save society a lot of money. So that's the way. That's one of the applications of labeling theory. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and let you go on this chapter. It's getting, as you can see behind me, it's getting dark. And but if you have any questions on any of the chapters for the exam, or on this chapter, just shoot me an email. I'd be glad to clarify any concepts or theories for you. So go ahead and study up for your exam, and I'll open the exam on Monday. All righty.